Hi, welcome to my library. This is Liz Aleshire, and this is Wisdom for the Weekend Writer. What we're going to be talking about tonight are one of the steps to get your novel published. Very important first step is that the novel has to be written. Unlike nonfiction, your book has to be done before you can start trying to sell it to an agent or an editor. After you've got the book done, the next thing you need to know is what genre it is. Now, genre is just a word to categorize the type of book that you've written. Why is that important? Well, so the ultimate reader can go into Borders or Barnes & Noble or go to Amazon.com and know how to find your book. So your ultimate audience needs to know this. The other people that need to know it are Borders and Barnes & Nobles and Amazon.com, so they can categorize it so the reader, the ultimate reader, can find it. And the publisher needs to know this as well. You'll need to know it because in order to get the right publisher, you need to know what your genre is, so that you're not trying to sell science fiction to a romance house. So what are genres? Well, romance is a genre. Historicals are a genre. Science fiction, mystery, fantasy, those are all genres. And just to make life a little more interesting for us, there are also subgenres. For instance, in mystery, there's a subgenre of the private eye. Now, this is a Janet Ivanovich, Stephanie Plum novel. She's really a bounty hunter, but it's the same general idea. That it's someone who's paid to capture a criminal or solve a crime. Carolyn Wheat writes, her main character is a lawyer, so kind of almost comes under the category of police procedural. Tony Hillerman, on the other hand, this is a police procedural because his detectives in the book are all active, on-the-job policemen. For historical, everybody knows Michener. That's that genre. And for action-adventure, Clive Cussler. Science fiction, Frank Herbert in Dune. Suspense, one of my favorites, Carla Neggers. And then historical romance, our old friend Zita Christian. How do you find a genre? There are a lot of reference books out there. Either go online to Amazon.com, go down to your local bookstore. In the writing reference section, you'll see books that will tell you different genres of murder mysteries, different genres of romance, different genres of science fiction, of fantasy, of horror, of suspense. And then figure out what your book is predominantly in genre. Now, maybe if you're Stephen King or Danielle Steele, you could get away with pitching a book that's a, well, let's say an action-adventure, historical, humorous Western. That's not going to fly when you try to pitch your book to an editor, though. Whatever your book is predominantly, that's the genre it wants to be in. So you're going to call it a Western. It will have historical implications. It will have humor. It'll probably even have a romance. But predominantly, it will be a Western. This is the way you flag to an editor when you send your query letter, and that's another segment, what the book is. They can instantly categorize it, they know where to put it, and they know that you've done your homework. The next step you need to do is at Borders or Barnes & Noble, go to those actual bookshelves, see what books are there. See if yours fits into the mystery category, the romance category, horror, supernatural. See where it fits in predominantly. And then you have your genre. You're done. Well, you're at least done with that part of it. You'll be able to start your query letter next. And that'll be a topic for later. And remember, I always want you to hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this. We're going to cover a step in the selling process of a novel. And this time it's the query letter. It's very simple to do. Well, no, actually it isn't very simple to do, but you'll get the hang of it. It's got to be one page. I'm going to say that several more times before I'm finished. It cannot be longer than one page. Your query letter is addressed to the publisher, who has said, listed in the listing, said that they will handle a Western novel, let's say, and your novel is a Western. Your very first paragraph is one sentence, and it reads, I propose an amateur detective mystery novel of 60,000 words titled Tracking Down the Killer Tomato. Now, of course, you're going to put in your genre, you're going to put in your title, and you're going to put in your word count. But that's your first sentence, the first paragraph, and that's done. Your second paragraph has to introduce the protagonist and describe them briefly. Now, I'm doing a little tongue-in-cheek here, but follow along, okay? Suave, debonair, wealthy, daylily judge, cool Marlborough, just wants to be left alone with the hybrids at his happy home in the Hamptons. But when the love of his life is kidnapped and the only clues are some tomato paste and oregano leaves left in the driveway, Cool knows he must rescue his lady love or his happy hybrid days are over. Believe it or not, that's kind of the language. Now, you're not going to do it this much tongue-in-cheek. You're going to be serious about it. But you want that kind of strong sales pitch language. Your third paragraph is going to do the same thing for the antagonist. Mean, nasty, ugly senior accountant Benson Hedges lives next door to Cool. Jealousy of his neighbor's perfect daylilies and Cool's increasing wealth from his patents drives Benson slowly mad. He loses his cool when Cool brings home the lovely Dahlia. Benson must possess her, too, dead or alive. So now we have our antagonist, our hero, and our protagonist, the villain. And we also have some of the conflict here, don't we? Dahlia has gone missing. So your fourth paragraph provides the conflict of the story, the reason the reader wants to keep reading. And it begins, the common seed is tomato. Benson, crazed with jealousy, leaves a path of paste clues leading to where Dahlia is imprisoned. But will Cool rescue her before Benson ravages and or kills her? Tomato sauce strainer in hand, Cool follows the trail, terrified that he'll be too late. That's the bulk of your query letter, and those 3 paragraphs are what we call the 30-second commercial. More on that on another day. The final paragraph of the query letter is, this book is complete. We've talked about this before, that in order to start selling your novel, it has to be completely written. Don't try to sell the novel before it's done. The book is complete, and I have a synopsis and sample chapters ready to send you. I am a certified daylily judge myself and have several patents for my hybrids. Now, why do we include that? Well, we've made the protagonist here, Cool Marlborough, a daylily hybrid breeder. So if you can tell an editor, I am too, they know automatically that you're an expert. They're not going to have to call in somebody to check on your vocabulary, make sure you've gotten everything technically correct. It's a plus in your favor if you can tie some of your experience, your knowledge, into the subject matter of the book. You need to tell an editor or the agent that so that they'll be more predisposed to buy your novel. That's it and you're done. The other step, of course, before this is please make sure that you're sending your query letter to a publisher that handles the genre the book is about. Now, if you'd like to see this query letter, please take a look at www.pagetv.com, page1tv.com, and look under words for Wisdom for the Weekend Writer, and it will be right there so that you can take a closer look at it. And remember, I always want you to hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this. We're going to cover another step in how to sell your novel. And this is a rather important piece. This is a synopsis. The synopsis will be the longest section of your book proposal. And what I did, I chose Gone with the Wind to make a sample proposal for, and we'll talk about that because I figure just about everybody knows the story of Gone with the Wind. So the synopsis is a compelling telling of the plot line of your book. It should start with the book jacket blurb. That's that 30-second commercial, and we've covered that in other segments. The first character introduced should be the protagonist. Don't start with the antagonist. Don't start with conflict. Always start with the hero. This is the first thing the agent or the editor reading this is going to want to know. What's your hero like? Or what is she like? Is he a strong enough character? Now you describe them, but not just physically. Describe personality traits, education, any background items that are going to be important to your plot line. Next, introduce your antagonist. Again, describing what makes him tick at the core. Then introduce the conflict. What is it the protagonist wants, needs, or lacks that he or she is willing to do almost anything to get? Obviously, you can't have conflict without a strong antagonist. And he should be in direct competition with the protagonist to achieve the same goal. Make sure the goal is one that only one or the other, only the protagonist or the antagonist, can achieve. They can share it. There's no conflict. Finally, tell the story of your novel. Include the major plot points and the more important subplots and secondary characters. Here is where you need to make the telling compelling. Use strong active verbs and specific nouns. Tell the plot in the order you've written the book, but try not to make it sound like a shopping list. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. Boring. So let me give you some examples from my proposal for Gone with the Wind. A willful, spoiled, egocentric Southern belle survives the Civil War. But can she survive the Reconstruction era, save the family plantation Tara, and win back the man she loves? Scarlett O'Hara learns the art of being a Southern gentlewoman from her mother, but inherits a love of the land and the family's plantation Tara from her Irish father. Convinced that he loves, Scarlett waits expectantly and confidently for Ashley Wilkes' proposal of marriage. Ashley Wilkes, a book and art-loving dreamer, is captivated by Scarlett's vibrancy, passion, and love of life, qualities he doesn't possess. Ashley believes that he and Scarlett are too different in personality and temperament to marry. At the barbecue and ball, to be held at the Wilkes Plantation, 12 Oaks, Ashley plans to announce his engagement to his cousin, Melanie. Scarlett is devastated when she learns of the impending announcement. Confident that he loves her, Scarlett schemes to corner Ashley at the party, pronounce her love, and convince him to elope. Now that's the start of the synopsis, and I think that's a pretty compelling telling. It's not just, well, she walked in the room, she picked this up, she picked that up. Now, another important point of your synopsis is that you have to tell the ending. Yes, you have to tell the ending. The editor needs to know that you can write not just the beginning, but also the ending. So check this out. Now dying, Melanie asks for Scarlett and extracts her promise that Scarlett will look after Ashley. Scarlett experiences true heartache over Melanie's impending death. Until that moment, she'd never realized how much her rival meant to her, how much of a real sister Melanie had been to her. Melanie asks Scarlett to stay while she says goodbye to Ashley. As Scarlett watches, Ashley crumbles from the weight of losing Melanie. Scarlett has the bitter revelation that Ashley has always loved Melanie, not her. And the even bigger revelation that she no longer loves Ashley. In a stunning moment of realization, Scarlett finally recognizes that she really loves Rhett. Everything everyone has ever said about happiness only being possible when like joins with like suddenly has the force of truth. Scarlett rushes from the death room to tell Rhett. Rhett is gone. He left the Wilkes home and no one knows where he went. With a growing feeling of loneliness, Scarlett runs from the house towards her own home. The fog has formed, and up ahead she can barely see a man, Rhett, striding away. It is her nightmare come true. She can't keep up with the figure striding into the mists. When she gets home, Red is standing in the spacious foyer with a packed bag. He tells Scarlet he's leaving her. Scarlet professes her love to him, tells him of her revelation, begs him to stay, but Rhett opens the door. "What will I do?" Scarlet says, sobbing. "Where will I go?" "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," says Rhett, as he walks away and is swallowed by the mist. Scarlet, the Southern belle, has succeeded at everything she set her mind to, except winning either of the men she loves. Is her spirit broken at last? No. For Scarlet, courage isn't a sometime thing, it's everything. She vows to return to Tara, not knowing what the future will hold. After all, she says through her tears, tomorrow is another day. That, I think, is a synopsis that an editor will really want to see the rest of that book, and that's your goal. If you'd like to see the whole synopsis, please go to www.pageonetv.com and go to Words for Wisdom for the Weekend Writer. Excuse me there. And I want you to remember always to hear me speaking in your ear. You can do this. The final step in trying to sell your novel is to put together the book proposal. This has to be ready to send to an agent or an editor when they respond to your query letter. This is what I like to use. It's a 2-pocket portfolio. And I get the one where I can put my business card into the little insert slots. There are other methods of doing this. Some editors and agents have suggested they would prefer to have the pages just clipped together with a butterfly clip, a binder clip, rather than have the portfolio. It seems to be a little more portable for them. But still in a state of flux on that in the publishing industry, so either method will work. What you need in the proposal is a title page. So let me get these papers out here, a little easier to go through them. You need a title page with the title of the book and your name as the author. You're going to go right into the synopsis. Now again, for this book proposal, I've chosen to use Gone with the Wind because of everybody's familiarity with the story. So the synopsis for Gone with the Wind in my proposal is about 8 pages long. That's a decent length. But you need to ask the editor or the publisher that you're pitching to how long a synopsis they want. Because I'll tell you, there is a trend these days to go for that they only want a 1-page synopsis. It's difficult enough to get Gone with the Wind down to 8 pages. Doing 1 page would be a challenge, but I'd be up for it if it meant making the sale. Then you would add your sample chapters. And here again, you need to ask the agent or the editor that you're pitching to how much they want. As a general rule, it's the first 3 chapters, no more than 50 pages. But again, I have read where some publishing houses will take the whole manuscript. If you've sent them a query letter and they've requested it, then you can send that. Always know what they want you to send. So there's your sample chapters. And at that point, for the normal commercial fiction, you're done. I added a few features for Gone with the Wind. I did a background page. Why? Gone with the Wind is rather politically incorrect these days, I would think. It's a little bit too long as well. It might have trouble selling. So I thought I should give it some more sales pitch. So here's what I did for background. Tired of the trite portrayal of all Southern belles as flighty, empty-headed trophy wives, Gone with the Wind was written to debunk the myth of the helpless Southern woman. Scarlett O'Hara is level-headed and proactive as she fights to save her home and feed her family. She quickly tosses off the gentlewomanly arts she learned from her mother to assume the roles of mother, father, wage earner, taxpayer, manager, supervisor, and cotton picker. Although the depictions of slaves in Gone with the Wind are far from politically correct in the 21st century, they are historically accurate, as are the depictions of the carpetbaggers. The book is long, but not slow. The pacing is quick, and backstory is fed slowly to the reader in an interesting way through action essential to the unfolding story. Details are rich and exacting, but not heavy. Adept description places the reader swiftly into the physical and emotional settings. The ending is left ambiguous on purpose. Although at story's end, Scarlet has neither Ashley nor Rhett, there is just enough foreshadowing for readers to finish the story in their heads and hearts, to discover Scarlet wins the real love of her life. It also leaves plenty of room for a sequel. Now, that sound like a justification to you? It is. There are some special, as I said, in today's market, be some special considerations to get Gone with the Wind published today. That's why I thought that was essential. Also, because it's so large, the synopsis cannot possibly cover all the subplots and all the minor characters in Gone with the Wind. So I also added a section for that, minor characters and subplots, with just a sentence or two for each one. Gerald O'Hara, Scarlet's father; Eileen Robillard O'Hara, Scarlet's mother; Prissy, Dilsey's daughter; Charles Hamilton, Scarlet's first husband, and so on. And then, of course, I would end with the sample chapters. The other component to the book proposal that you want to include is your About the Author. This is a page about you as it relates to your book. If your book is about a nuclear physicist, and you are a nuclear physicist, please include that in your About the Author. It'll make the editor very happy that they don't have to call in another nuclear physicist to make sure that your vocabulary and technical descriptions are correct. That's the book proposal. If you'd like to see the whole thing, please go to www.pageonetv.com and click on Wisdom for the Weekend Writer, and it'll be there for you to see. Remember, I'm telling you, you can do this. I write primarily nonfiction, and I've had students ask me, I want to write a book about roses. How do I find out if it's already been written? Well, there's this handy-dandy guide that you can get use of through your local library called Subject Guide to Books in Print. Subject Guide to Books in Print. It's very expensive, even before it was online. When it was in books, it's about 4 volumes. They're about this wide and this big, and it costs a fortune to buy them. You have to go to your local library to use them. And they now have an online service, but unfortunately that's just as expensive to subscribe to. So your local library probably subscribes to it anyway, and you can go there and use it. Subject Guide to Books in Print is exactly what it sounds like. So in the guide, you're going to look up roses, and it's going to tell you all the books that are on the market today, still in print, that are about roses. And then you can go through the list, figure out, is yours different from all the rest of them? Let's say you want to write about just raising the reddest roses possible, and you go to Subject Guide to Books in Print. There's already a rose book on that, on how to get the best color out of your rose bush. So you're not going to be able to do that. There has to be some other angle that you can take about raising roses, like coffee grounds are the best fertilizer, or mixing them with baking powder is what's going to do the trick for your roses. So you have to find something that's different. Because I'll tell you something, you can have more than one book, obviously, on a topic, as long as each of the books has a slightly different perspective or point of view on that topic. And just to give you an example, the #1 selling nonfiction book in the world is the cookbook. Now, I would have thought a long time ago that we had enough cookbooks already, but evidently I'm wrong. They just keep publishing them. So there's another one you can think of. If you do some different kind of cooking, I bet there's a cookbook in your future. When you have that list from Subject Guide to Books in Print of all the books out there on roses, the next thing you're going to do is you want to see those books. You want to take a look at them. See if you can read an excerpt from them. Again, you want to go to your favorite local or online bookstore, put in the topic of roses, or the titles of the books that you found in Subject Guide to Books in Print. That will call up those books. Amazon, I know, generally has excerpts. So does the Barnes & Noble online site. You can read an excerpt. Generally, a lot of times you can see the table of contents too. So at least you'll know what the angle of that particular rose book is. And what you want to do is when you know something about that book, you want to jot down some notes about how your book is different than that book. In reality, what you're trying to do is find ways that your book is better than that book. And you want to do that with all the books on your list. The publishing industry knows. They know what's out there. And if they know there's 50 books on roses and you come up with another one, you're going to have to show them that yours is different. There's always room for one more book. Certainly always one more cookbook. So, you also need to talk with people in order to find out how your topic can be handled differently. Pitch it to your friends, see what they've got to say about it. The greatest place to start is if your friends keep telling you, you should write a book about that. That's probably what you ought to write a book about. Do something different. So you're going to start with a list. The books that are already out there. You're going to start with your own table of contents, your concept of your book, which may change when you see what else is out there. And then you're going to come up with all the ways your book is better than everybody else's book. Sure to get published that way. Remember, I always want you to hear me whispering in your ear. You can do this. I had a student come to me once with a question. She was researching a nonfiction book, which is primarily what I've published, is nonfiction books. And she had a ton of research, piles of paper, and she was stuck. She just didn't know how to get it organized. Well, I just happen to have this handy-dandy organizing method, so I taught it to her. I'm going to teach it to you as well. The basis for my method is the index card. Just like this, 3 by 5, lined or unlined, doesn't matter. I like the line because it makes you write less, so your notes are going to be really concise. You need a method, however. Every research source is going to be books, magazines, newspapers, TV transcripts. Each source needs to have a number. That's where your index cards get started. You're going to write in the number of your source, starting of course with number 1 with the first source, and you're going to put all the details down. The author, the publication, the TV show, the transcript, the date, the publisher, the year, the city, all of the stuff that you need. And one way to find out exactly what you need for a source is take a look at how to write a bibliography, and that will show you all the information you need to do. So source number 1 becomes like my book, Liz Aleshire, Private Lives of Ministers' Wives, published by New Horizon Press in New Jersey, 1993, and where I found it, my local library. Now when I go through that book and write my notes, I'm going to take another index card. I'm going to put the number 1 in the top right-hand corner, left-hand corner actually. I'm backwards because I'm looking at the camera. Then you don't have to write down that information again. You don't have to write all the credits, just the number 1. Then you know this note came from source number 1. And you keep going along that way. Each index card should be one note, one notation, one reference from a specific page in the source, one line from a transcript, so that you can keep it concise and you're able to organize it. Now the next thing you need, you can see I have my little index card storage box too, is you need the index card divider tabs. This little part up here, you're going to put in chapter numbers, each one of these for each chapter in your book. Now when you have all these piles of index cards, what you're going to do is take a look at each one of them and file them in the chapter you think that topic should be in. Should it be in chapter 1? Stick the note in chapter 1. Should it be in chapter 8? Stick the note in chapter 8. When you're done, all the notes that you've taken are organized by chapter. You get ready to write the book, you just pull out all the cards for chapter 1 and then sort them out and start writing. So don't let a lot of research, a lot of paper wear you down. That's the other thing besides index cards. You need to use Pendaflex files, excuse me, because it's also better when you're getting information out of a magazine article or the newspaper. Take a copy of it and then you've got the actual original document that you can stick in a Pendaflex file folder. Again, one folder for each chapter, and then you've got all your notes in place. Now, I know it's the computer age. Should we really be talking about using index cards and little boxes? Shouldn't we be doing all of this on the computer? Well, if your mind can work that way, by all means, go ahead. Some kind of access or database program, you can probably organize all your notes on the computer and be able to access them the way you need to. For me, I need to have all of my notes spread out in front of me on the table. And then I can pick and choose which ones I want to start first, to go next, to go next, to go next. And actually, I use that technique with fiction as well as nonfiction. Find a place to start from the cards spread out on the table in front of you, and then add them on as you go. Before you know it, you've got a chapter done. So think about it. How to organize that research? Give everything a source number, and you'll never miss not telling the world where you got your information from. And if a publisher wants to know where you got your source, you'll have it all in your little index cards. So thanks, and I want you to keep remembering to hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this. Today, I want to talk to you about finding time. For the part-time writer, that's particularly hard, as you well know, I'm sure. I want to introduce to you the second greatest invention since the computer for a writer, and that's the kitchen timer, this little thing. In fact, I'm going to set it for 5 minutes. Got to follow the rules. You have to go past 30 minutes and then come back. We'll get back to the timer. Finding time to write means that you've got to make the commitment to it, first of all. You have to decide that this is what you want to do, and you're going to carve out time to find it. You need to talk with your family, your kids, your spouse, whoever you live with, and tell them that for certain hours, 9 to 10, every weeknight of the week, you're going to be sitting at your desk writing. You need to not let them interrupt you either. Let them know that you're very serious about this. You take the time seriously. Some people have also said they get up earlier than everybody else in the family, so they've got some quiet time alone where they can do their writing. I'm not too good at getting up early, so that's not one that I picked. Other people have said they stay up later than everyone else after everyone else has gone to bed. The house, again, is quiet. Then they can get some work done. That's usually what I used to do. One of the things, I've taught classes before at continuing education for certain towns at Manchester Community College. And one of the things I say to my students is, this is a 10-week class. Which week do you think is the most important week? And they try to figure out, because I give them a syllabus. They know what we're going to be doing every week. It's week 3 because we're learning dialogue. It's week 7 because we're learning characterization. But then I point out to them that the really important week is the 11th. What are you going to be doing for those 2 hours the week after the class ends? That's the important part. So if you want to get yourself kick-started, you want to find those 2 hours to work every week, start out by taking a class. That'll train you, everybody in your family, that those 2 hours are yours and yours alone. And if you can find those 2 hours for the length of your class, you can find them every week after that. The other thing to do is you can spend a couple of weeks writing a time journal. What do you do every day? When do you do it? What are the things that you're committed to? What time slots do you have to devote to something else? Dinner, 5 to 7 with your family, to cook it, prepare it, clean up, and visit. You need to factor all of those things in. When you have your journal done for a couple of weeks, take a look at what the spots are. Where are the holes that you really don't have anything planned that you have to do? Those are the spots that you need to take as your commitment to your writing. Now, writing does take a certain amount of focus. And what I hear people say a lot of the time is, oh, I can't write for just a half hour. I've got to have, like 4 hours straight or a whole day, and I just can't be interrupted. Well, in the ideal world, wouldn't that be great? I don't think any of us live in the ideal world, so you're going to have to give up on that. What you have to do is learn how to focus in the time that you have available to write. That means if you have small children, you're going to be writing at nap time. And yeah, you have to learn how to turn on the creative juices and turn them off again. One of the things that I did to get myself going when I had to go back to writing and only had a short period of time was to write past the beginning. I never ended, excuse me, I never ended a writing session at the end of a scene or the end of a chapter. I always kept writing through the beginning of the next scene. That way when I come back to it, I'm not starting at the beginning. I'm not starting with a blank page. I'm in the middle of something. I can pick up that train of thought and keep going. Now that's where the timer comes in. Well, let's say it's 15 minutes until you have to leave the house to go to the doctor. Set your little handy dandy timer for 15 minutes. See? That was 5 minutes. We accomplished quite a bit. The beauty of this is that you can work without watching the clock. You don't have to keep trying to remember that in 15 minutes I have an appointment, in 10 minutes I have an appointment. Yeah, that's going to disrupt your focus. You're not going to be able to concentrate enough to get much writing done in that time period. But with the timer, the bell goes off, you're done. Finish that segment, and maybe you've gotten a page done. A page every day, you'll have a book in a year. So that's about finding time. You got to carve it out for yourself. You have to be serious and let everybody else know that you're serious about writing. And I want you to remember, hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this. I want to talk to you about one of my favorite topics tonight, and that's writers' conferences. I've just come back from my absolute favorite, the International Women's Writing Guild Annual Summer Conference at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs. Why should you go? And I'm telling you that it's imperative that you go to a writers' conference if you haven't been already. Find one that's only for a day. Your next step would be for a weekend. The Skidmore Conference is a week. I recommend that heartily. But why would you want to go? Well, primarily to learn. Writers' conferences are places where there are workshops offered by experienced writers, published writers, and they can teach you dialogue, description, characterization, how to do research for your nonfiction book, how to write poetry, how to write essays. So you're going to go to learn. That should be your number one reason. So when you're looking for a writers' conference, make sure that they're offering topics that are going to be important to you. For instance, Romance Writers of America, if you're not interested in writing a romance, that may not be the conference for you to start at. And if you're going to write fiction, then the American Society of Journalists and Authors Conference isn't the one to go to because they're primarily nonfiction. Another reason to go to a writers' conference is for the chance to meet other writers. You could perhaps establish a working writing critiquing group that gets together on a regular basis. Many writers find that very helpful. I have a friend, Glenda Baker. She's editor-in-chief of NEWN magazine, and the logo for the magazine is Writers Need Other Writers. Couldn't be more true. It's such a thrill to get to a conference. You're a science fiction writer, and to meet 3 other people that are writing science fiction. It's that instant connection. You have vocabulary in common. You have an interest in common. You don't have to do a lot of explaining ahead of time. Everybody who's writing science fiction has some idea of what the genre is and the conventions involved in it. And it's great to click like that with somebody. Writers' conferences these days are also a chance to promote yourself. Many of them have agents and editors who attend specifically to give you an opportunity to pitch your book to them. Ones like the Maui Writers Conference, they charge for a certain number of minutes for you to meet with an agent or an editor. But the International Women's Writing Guild, the agents and editors who attend there, they give their time free. So you get some practice pitching your book. You may even end up leaving the conference with an agent or an editor who's going to give you a book contract. You also go to get feedback. Many of the conferences and the workshop leaders will provide time for you to read your work out loud to the class, and then you'll get critiques back on it. They're instantaneous, they're not in depth, they can't be in the short period of time that, you know, a workshop is maybe an hour and 15 minutes. But you'll get some feedback on what you've written. The importance of that, just phenomenal. Again, at IWWG, that conference, we have open readings every night. And for some women, that's the very first time that they've been able to read their work to an audience. And for many of them, that has been just transformational. They're so excited about it afterwards. The whole crowd comes down to tell them how wonderful their reading was. That's very helpful. The final reason you should go to a writer's conference has a lot to do with that previous one. It's for the encouragement. If you don't come home from a writer's conference excited, charged, ready to get to your typewriter, your computer, or just a simple steno pad, it wasn't the right conference for you to go to. It's important to get that encouragement, that support, to be with other people. Writers need other writers. So look for one. A great source is the internet. Just Google or Yahoo, whatever you want to do, whatever your favorite is, writing conferences, a whole list of them is going to come up. And you'll be able to research them, find out which ones have the topics that you're interested in, pick one, and plan to go. Well, that's it for writers' conferences. I want you to remember, you're always going to hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this. Today's topic is to talk about characterization. In your novel, you're going to hear an awful lot about this. It's extremely important. Characters are number one. If you don't have good characters in your book, you can have the best plot in the world, but readers are just not going to be interested. Basically, you have two types of characters to pick from, particularly in the novel. There's the flat character, there's the well-rounded character. In a short story, you're going to have a couple of well-rounded characters and no flat characters. So what's a flat character? A flat character is somebody with only one trait. It's someone that's going to show up in your novel maybe only once because there's a key piece of information that they've got to get across to the reader. And there's also that you want a recognition factor. So there are four kinds of flat characters. You can do national types. Your typical Irishman, your typical Polish, typical American Indian, typical Mexican, that kind of thing. You kind of run into the problem there of stereotypes and maybe some politically incorrect thinking as well. But when you're trying to communicate something to a reader in a flat character with a nationality type will make that instant recognition. It's a good way to go. Another flat character is just the occupation. You've got a character, your detective needs to have some information about a nuclear physicist. So you bring in a nuclear physicist. We all know he's a geek with a pocket protector and the pens in it, eyeglasses, and the reader automatically knows who that character is. They're not going to be sticking around very long, so you don't have to make them well-rounded. Another type is a social type. It's the typical bachelor uncle, the typical blind date, the typical hostess, the typical weekend guest. Again, these are stereotypes the reader's going to identify with immediately, creates an image of the character in their head, and you don't have to spend a lot of your word count describing them in order to get the information they possess across to the reader. And then the fourth flat character is personality. It's typical worrywart, typical nervous Nelly, typical tactful person, eternal optimist, that kind of thing. When you create those characters, throw them out to the reader just to get information across to them, they're easy. The reader will pick up automatically on all the cues that you're trying to get across in that flat character. Now, we don't want a lot of flat characters. In a novel, particularly, you want several well-rounded characters, and enough of the flat characters. You just can't find a way around getting the information to the reader that you have to. You may have to create this flat character to do that. A well-rounded character is someone that you describe in scenes. Now, this is not the time to be stingy with your words. Don't tell the reader what your character looks like. Show the reader what they're like. One example, you've got a billionaire who only donates $1 a year to the United Way. There's one way in narrative. You would show that as a scene. You know, the United Way representative approaching him and saying, "Gee, Bob, you know, you got $14 million. Can you give the United Way some?" He says, "Sure, here's a check for $1." Now, that takes a lot more words than saying he was a billionaire but stingy. But it's a lot more interesting than those 2 short sentences. You also need to, in the novel, keep reminding the reader what this personality is like, what this character is like. So the billionaire, you're going to show one scene that he's given a $1 donation to the United Way. In another scene, you're going to see him just making a big fuss over paying for his lunch because he didn't like the way it was served. And then you may have another scene where he gives his granddaughter a mink stole. This tells us a lot about this character. If it's important to him, of course, he'll spend the money. If it's not important to him, get out of his way, you ain't getting none. You also need to use dialogue in a well-rounded character, and I would suggest that you actually talk to your character. See how that character would respond in the persona that you've created for him, so that you can write the dialogue that's natural to that character. Does he have an accent? Does he have a dialect? Does he like the word perhaps and uses it in every other sentence? Those are the things that you would like to find out, and those are the things to add to a character to make them well-rounded. Now, you use description sparingly, and a lot of times this description is not of your character itself, but the character's surroundings. If we take a typical garbage pickup man, here I'm going to get politically incorrect. When we go to his house, though, he's got, like me, bookshelves. And they're all Shakespeare, Hawthorne, Hemingway. We don't expect that from this stereotypical character that we've created. And that's one way to make that character well-rounded. What are their surroundings? What do their surroundings tell us about them? You've also got to be careful with your characters how you describe the clothing they wear, their choice of movies. For readers, those are conventions that signal character traits to the reader. They're used to this, they want to see it happen. So don't put a shy person in a red sequin dress, okay? Sometimes you've got to keep the character to keep them well-rounded. You're looking for a roommate. How would you describe the roommate? Height, weight, eye color? No. What you want to do is describe them as nervous twitching, or a high-pitched voice, or very laid back. That's what we mean by description. You can also use the opinions of others. Other characters in the novel can express an opinion about the protagonist, about your well-rounded character. The thing I like about you most is that you gave your granddaughter a mink stole, but you gave those lousy United Way people only $1. So bring in other characters to talk about your main character. This will also bring out more traits of that person and make them well-rounded. Then, having said all of that, you have to have a well-rounded character. They have to have traits. You have to know what they are. You have to present them to the reader. But please remember that you cannot present an entire life in one novel. So you need to stay focused. What do you want the dominant impression of your character to be? In this case, we want him to be stingy. So you're going to have to keep working on that all the way through your story, all the way through your novel. Keep that in mind at all times, so that you're going to stay focused and not try to include everything in their history from the day they were born on. Can't do it. So that's characters. Flat, you're going to use very sparingly, and only when there's no other way to introduce information to the reader. And well-rounded, well, that's what your protagonist, antagonist, and major subcharacters should be, is well-rounded. So, there you have characters. And remember, I want you to hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this. Today's topic is flashbacks. A lot of writers like to use them, but mostly they're writers that don't get published all that much because a flashback interrupts the flow of a story. The definition of a flashback is it's the art of explaining why. Why is a character afraid of balloons? Why is a character always wanted to be a clown? Those are the whys that may affect your story. So a flashback is where you actually take the reader, you stop the action that's in the present in your book and you take them to the past to explain some incident, something that happened that molded that character. We really feel we need to do this. And flashbacks do work if you work them the way they're supposed to be. And the biggest thing to remember with a flashback is you have to start with the past perfect in your verb tense. He had been at 9 years old afraid of balloons. He had an experience when he was 12 that made him love clowns. After a couple sentences of using that past perfect, you can go back to the present because the reader gets it. That's a convention that's been used in fiction for centuries. So the reader understands what you're doing. When you get to the end of your flashback, you're going to go back again to those past perfect verbs. And that signals to the reader that you're just about coming out of the flashback. Now the flashback itself should be a scene. It shouldn't be a telling, it should be a showing. You'll be showing the reader something that happened that affected your character's personality, the plot line in the book that you're writing. So, where do you put in a flashback? Well, for one thing, I've read a lot of short stories. As fiction editor for NEWN magazine, I read a lot of short stories, a couple thousand at least. Short story is not the place for a flashback. It's too short. You can only use a flashback realistically in a novel, and you're going to use it in the very beginning of the novel. You want a nice, quiet break in the action somewhere. You don't want to have, the chase scene from French Connection where they're in the car and they're racing through the streets of New York City, going onto the subway train and all the rest of that and almost hitting the lady with the baby carriage and everything. You wouldn't want to stop the middle of that to go back and explain what happened to Gene Hackman's character when he was 10. So you need a quieter scene. And usually that's called a sequel. There's a scene, that's where big things are happening, a lot of information is given to the reader. And then there's a sequel. Sequel is when a character has to decide to do something, has to decide to react to what happened in the scene before. So your flashback should always be in a sequel. Find a quiet time, a time when the character has time to reflect. The other important thing about a flashback is you don't have to use them. You can do something else. One of the nice effective ways to get information to the reader that you think the reader absolutely has to have about the past of this character is put in a scene where there's a conversation between this character and another character where the story comes out, where the information is explained in that scene, over dinner, in between shots while they're shooting at the bad guys, whatever. There are better ways to handle getting information into your background information into your novel than the flashback. It's good practice to learn how to do it effectively, but you should look for other ways to do this besides the flashback, something that can take place in the current action. So use the flashback sparingly. The other thing that writers do is they put all the background information about their character in the first chapter. Don't do that either, okay? You can figure out a way to work it in. And the reader is very patient. They don't need to know everything right up front. They're willing to go along and learn it as you advance the plot. So watch out for flashbacks, learn how to use them, and then don't ever use them again. And I want you to remember to hear me whispering in your ear, you can do this.